Another video from Epsilon, great Clash Royale creator. What's the worst card in Clash Royale history? Let's see.
This video is something that I wanted to make for a while, but I never realized how difficult it is to make a video about the worst cards, since it's not easy to find discussion and footage on bad cards. But I thought that since I already made a video on the best cards, I may as well commit to making a video on the worst cards. That's why in this video, I've compiled a list of the absolute worst cards of all time, in order to find out what is the worst card in Clash Royale history. The clone spell is literally the first thing that comes to mind when someone talks about bad cards. Its entire purpose in the game is to serve as a surprise factor, and that's it. Its ability isn't great and it's very situational. And aside from when the clone spell was glitched, it has literally never been good. The fact that it depends on either being glitched or being used to surprise the opponent is pretty depressing. And the thing is, Clash Royale knows this. They purposely keep the clone spell weak because they don't want a card with such a broken ability to be viable. It's supposed to be a bad card, so that it catches players off guard when it's played. However, I can't rate the clone too low on this list, since I think it's still—
Oh yeah, I forgot to say, worst card, Barb Hut, no arguing. I know we have some Barb Hut lovers, but
still super fun to mess around with, and I actually kind of think it works in 2v2, since you can have double the elixir worth of cards cloned with a single clone.
Oh my god.
Now we'd be out.
wow.
We're both rushing from that. We almost lost. That was funny. They thought they...
Introducing Outplayed.
Alright, shut up.
There isn't really much else to say about the clone. It's probably one of the only cards in the game that's purposely bad, so it keeps the game in balance and it still makes it fun to use. Something that I've always noticed is that new cards always seem to be able to counter the Sparky one way or another. And Supercell added yet another card to this list recently with the Vine spell, which can stun the Sparky. But despite this, Sparky is still decently popular in the current landscape of Clash Royale, since it pairs well with cards like Giant and Goblin Giant, which are pretty popular in the current meta. However, I think the 2016 and 2017 Sparky is notable as being the worst legendary in Clash Royale history. The main difference between the OG Sparky and the current day Sparky is its attack speed. During the earlier days of Clash Royale, the Sparky's charge up time was 5 seconds instead of 4 seconds like it is today. And I think this charge up time is the main reason the Sparky was so terrible. The Sparky had the longest attack interval in the game in 2016 and 2017, but it also had the highest damage of any troop in the game. Fast attack speed is preferred over high damage output, since being able to attack faster means that a card will be better able to take care of swarms, and also be able to consistently get more hits against other cards. On the other hand, having extremely high damage output with a long interval between attacks is riskier, since the opponent can more easily waste the high damage output with a card that was never gonna survive even a weak attack, such as skeletons, meaning that thousands of damage is effectively reduced to none. And this is the exact reason the Sparky was so bad at this time. It didn't make sense just to get a chance to get damage on something, especially since 1 and 2 elixir cards were extremely popular at the time, with cards like the Ice Spirit, Skeletons, and Ice Golem all having a time in 2016 and 2017 where they were used in over 60% of top ladder decks. So if you could easily counter a Sparky with literally just skeletons surrounding the Sparky, it would be a waste of 6 whole elixir. Another reason the Sparky struggled so much during this time was because of the prominence of the elixir collector. High usage of the elixir collector meant that a lot more decks made use of Rocket and Lightning, meaning that it would be useless to have Sparky in a lot of decks, since a player could get so much value rocketing the Sparky away.
Glad they reduced rocket tower damage.
I mentioned this in my video of the best cards in Clash Royale, but the Zap was probably the most used spell in 2016 to 2017. And again, the Zap spell hard countered the Sparky, so if you knew your opponent was running Zap, it made it useless to use Sparky. The tragedy of the 2016 and 2017 Sparky is that it was never given a chance to be good, because its best counters were all extremely popular, and it didn't help that Sparky was also extremely easy to counter. Throughout 2016 and 2017, the Sparky was absent from the top 200 decks, literally recording 0 uses for almost 2 years straight. It was only after Clash Royale reworked her attack interval to what it is now that Sparky saw some usage in competitive play. The current day Golden Knight is a great card, and I honestly love the rework that
Golden
Clash Royale
Knight.
gave him in mid-2025, where they reworked his dash so that it was more consistent. However, the version of the Golden Knight before this rework was easily one of the worst cards of all time. I'm talking about the Golden Knight was pretty busted, since his dash was completely unpredictable. Of course, Clash Royale would eventually nerf it, since half the time the Golden Knight ability was used,
Golden Knight
neither
was
player
actually
would know
insane
what would
when it
happen,
first
since
released, I
sometimes
remember.
it could dash across the map, and other times it would
loved
do just
it.
a regular dash, rendering it pretty useless. However, the nerf to his dash range in 2023 was the
RP.
change that would basically ruin the Golden Knight's unique ability. This change made his dash pretty useless in most situations, since it wasn't made clear on which directions he could and couldn't dash, and a lot of the time, the dash wouldn't work if a troop was behind him, even if that troop was ever so slightly behind. This made it useless to use the Golden Knight in competitive play, since it wasn't even skill anymore to use the Golden Knight ability, since it wouldn't work most of the time you used it, and this risk wasn't even worth taking, especially if you wanted to win reliably rather than depending on a gimmicky strategy. On top of that, it was really easy to counter him, since many players realized that his dash would end if he was faced with something that would be behind him. This rendered the Golden Knight useless, and for almost 2 years, he remained the worst champion in the game. You would expect that if you spent 4 elixir on a troop and an extra 1 elixir for a dash, you would at least get more value than a 3 elixir bandit, but in some cases, this wasn't even true. The Golden Knight consistently sat at a usage under 1% throughout this period, with win rates well under 40%. And since you are only allowed 1 champion per deck, the other champions were just so much better to use compared
Imagine
to
if
the
you could
Golden
have
Knight,
multiple
especially since a lot
champions.
of the other champions were in some
Would
of the
literally be
strongest states
champion
of
royale.
all time in this 2-year period, where the Golden Knight was in his worst state ever, making it even worse for the card. So the combination of terrible balancing and other champions being extremely overpowered led the 2023 to mid-2025 Golden Knight to be one of the worst cards of all time. The Void spell was such a unique idea on release, but I think it was
Man,
way
bro.
too good considering that it was basically a lightning spell for 3 elixir if played correctly. Clash Royale would try to balance out the card by nerfing its single target damage and spell duration,
almost
but it
killed
took
Void, I
5
ain't gonna
nerfs
lie.
over a period of 3 months until Clash Royale could tone the card down, which shows how strong it really was in its launch state. However, the 5th nerf in October 2024, which reduced its single target damage by a whopping 32%, was the nail in the coffin.
We all
in
know
my
the
opinion.
Supercell
It was
cycle
such a
though.
strange
Release
nerf, as if
broken,
Clash Royale
then
just
nerf
gave
once they
up
got
and
their money.
purposely killed the card, especially
Yup.
when you put this nerf next to the other nerfs,
You
which
just
was
said
such
what I
small
said.
changes to the card. This made the November 2024 Void spell probably one of the worst states a spell has ever been in Clash Royale, down there with the Mirror and the Clone spell, and to this day, it's still in that kind of position. However, I think it was worse than the typical bad spells, because at least those spells had niche use cases and were fun to troll with. The November 2024 Void spell was just a bad card, and it wasn't even fun to use or troll with either. The one thing that made the Void viable was its high damage output if it wasn't reacted to fast enough. But the thing is, this new Void spell was so weak, it didn't even matter if you reacted fast to protect your troops, since each individual strike, which was the most deadly attack of the card, couldn't even do as much damage as arrows. I do understand that the 3 strikes, if stacked up, could do more than a fireball's worth of damage, but it was basically impossible to reliably get all 3 strikes to be single strikes, since the opponent would have plenty of time to block the big strikes with cycle cards. I haven't seen the November 2024 and onward Void spell in so long that I forgot that it was even a card in the game, and the
Literally, I
only
never
recent
see
gameplay
Void in
that
a
I've
match.
seen of this card is while doing research for this video and actively looking for it. The main reason this version of the card is so bad is because there is nothing the Void is really good at. It can't take out tanks reliably like lightning, since it has such low single attack damage, and it can't take out swarms, since its damage plummets when more than 1 card is in the radius. It's no surprise that since November 2024, the Void has sat around a 0 to 1% usage rate, reaching win rates as low as 30%, earning its place as one of the worst spells of all time.
This game gives us everything. Triumph, heartbreak, hope. Because no matter
The Rune Giant was yet another card that received the Void treatment, where Clash Royale struggled to balance her broken ability, so they just did the most logical thing and nuked her stats, so that she would stay a dead card forever and they wouldn't even have to think about it again. The January and February 2025 Rune Giant was a very strong card, since her enchant ability was broken with certain cards that shoot multiple projectiles, like the Firecracker, Evolved Goblin Giant, and Hunter. But also, the fact that this enchant ability would stay on cards that she enchanted forever made her broken, since it made these cards way deadlier, and the opponent couldn't really do anything about it. So after around 2 months of being broken, Clash Royale destroyed the card by basically returning her to her original launch stats during the March 2024 balance changes. And I know this was a sign of Clash Royale giving up on the card, since they knew the launch Rune Giant was bad, which is why they buffed it. So this nerf was basically them admitting that it wasn't worth their effort to try and balance the card out, which is why they killed it off. By returning her to her launch stats and also fixing the bugs that made her broken, while also nerfing her health, meant that the March 2025 Rune Giant was basically an ice golem that cost 4 elixir, that had a useless ability that only worked in specific decks. But the cards that it worked well with don't even synergize well with the decks that the Rune Giant works well in. To this day, the Rune Giant has basically been forgotten, recording a 0% usage rate in grand challenges consistently, with win rates consistently at or under 30%, indicating that even when used for her gimmick, she can't win games, making her the only win condition that's actually a lose condition. The April and May 2024 meta was a terrible time for Clash Royale, since such a toxic tower troop like the Dagger Duchess ruined the chances for any non-beatdown deck to thrive. And it was during this time
literally
that the
giant
consistently
decks,
worst
like every
spawners of
single
all
match.
time
That
were
was
probably
so
the worst they have ever been throughout their entire
so
existence. I'm of course talking about the April 2024 Barb Hut, Goblin Hut, and Furnace. And it's no surprise why these cards were terrible in this meta. Before the Furnace and Goblin Hut reworks, they would both either spawn Spear Goblins or Fire Spirits every 5 seconds. The issue with this is that the Dagger Duchess would be able to one-shot the Spear Goblins, so that none of them could get a hit on the tower, and the Fire Spirits from the Furnace would get 2-shot, meaning there was no point of even pressuring with them, since the Duchess could recharge well before another wave of either Fire Spirits or Spear Goblins could spawn. The main reason why this was such a bad thing was because these cards were mainly used to either get chip damage on the tower or serve as a last resort defense card, and if you went up against Duchess in 90% of your games, then you wouldn't even be able to get any chip damage at all. And the fact that beatdown was so popular in this meta meant that even though it was nice to have a building, the Furnace and Goblin Hut just weren't good enough compared to cards like the Cannon and the Tesla, which could wreck tanks. This made these spawners completely useless in this meta, and it doesn't help that they were already pretty terrible cards going into this meta, since it served basically no purpose in any kind of deck, but also because there were so much better cards that could reliably get chip damage on the tower, like the Miner or the Goblin Drill. And no, I did not forget about the Barb Hut. The thing is, the Dagger Duchess could also wreck the Barbarians from the Barb Hut, so an already useless card was made even more useless. However, I still feel like the Barb Hut had potential to do well in this meta, since these Barbarians could soak up the knives of the Duchess. It's just that it was so expensive, and basically would give the opponent free spell value, so it makes sense that when you take 3 already bad cards and place them in a meta that directly counters the only thing that even made them remotely close to being viable, these cards will suffer. All 3 of these cards had a 0% usage rate throughout the 2-month Dagger Duchess meta, and these cards saw the lowest win rates I have ever seen a building have in the entire history of Clash Royale, consistently hovering at around 10% win rate, easily making them some of the worst cards of all time. A common trend for a lot of the cards on this list is that they were broken at some point, and then nerfed into the ground so that Clash Royale can try their best to retry with the card, and the Goblin Machine was no different to this. The Goblin Machine went from being the best card of all time to literally one of the worst cards of all time in less than a month. This is because Clash Royale nerfed the main thing that made it OP, which was the damage that the
machine was
did.
like this
and
broken.
I feel like
this was when I wasn't playing the game.
Nerf to his health and damage would have been enough, but Clash Royale went way too far. They nerfed his HP by almost 16%, and his rocket attack interval by 0.5 seconds, and even his first attack speed. And when the Goblin Machine didn't have OP rockets, the card was basically useless, since there was nothing else it really did well. It had less health than other tanks with a similar DPS like the Giant Skeleton, and its rocket was pretty terrible, since it didn't really hit what the machine was targeting most of the time. I think the Goblin Machine had the largest drop in usage for a card ever in the span of 2 weeks, going from its 83% usage on the first day to literally 0%. The only other card that comes to mind was the Elixir Collector's drop in usage after its nerf in 2016, but even that wasn't this major. The July and August 2024 Goblin Machine is easily one of the worst cards in Clash Royale history, and it's surprising that Supercell didn't abandon it like they did with the Void spell. Between October and November,
This is all I feel like watching, so full video is going to be in the description as always. If you enjoy, like, comment, subscribe. Love you all. PLAKZ.